everyone, my name is Josh and welcome to WHIMS. And today I've got my top 10 list of films and TV shows that I've changed my mind on over the years. And I'm going to get right into it. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more, please subscribe and hit the notification button so you can know when I've uploaded new videos. And I'm going to get right into it with the Halloween 2018 trilogy. And this trilogy takes place 40 years after the events of the original Halloween film, where Laurie Strode has survived the attack of Michael Myers, and she's now moved on. She's now gone from a respectable and polite teenager who's very responsible to becoming an action hero sort. She basically is practicing fire practice on mannequins. She's firing shotguns at mannequins. She's got her entire basement stocked up as if it's a doomsday shelter. And she's also projecting her own inner traumas and anxieties onto her own child of Karen, and then that in turn has made her grow up and distance herself from her own mother, and she's had a daughter of her own who she's also projecting, but she's doing the complete opposite of what Laurie is doing, where she's teaching her child to see the world as a polite and wonderful and a place full of love and understanding, as she calls it. But in reality, that's not always the case. There is often evil, little bits of evil here and there. And this entire trilogy is good. It's not perfect, it's not spectacular, it's not a masterpiece, but it's good. I feel like it's not as good as my original trilogy, which is Halloween, Halloween 2 and Halloween H2O, because in those instances, especially in Halloween H2O, Laurie's dealing with trauma is much more realistically portrayed, where she still is the same Laurie from the original film. She still is someone who's very responsible, she does her duties very well, she's a good mum, and she's even a headmistress of a private school, so she's like the figure of authority. But she's also dealing with lots of trauma from her past, and it's forced her to become an alcoholic, so it is very realistic, and it's showing her through her alcoholism, her reliance on drinking white wine and red wine in between meals, is her slowly cracking, that she's barely, able to hold herself together, and this trauma that she's dealing with is getting to her. Whereas in the case of the 2018 series, it's more like how to deal with trauma on steroids, where it's like, okay, she's going to be a badass action hero, and she's going to be firing guns, she's going to be, doing self-defense, she's going to be stocking a room like a doomsday shelter, and it's all sorts of madness. But it still is fun, and it still is a degree of just seeing that transformation, that very sudden transformation from being a very respectable, very kind, respectable, very responsible teenager to being this very kind of hardened, much older woman who literally has gone through a lot of trauma. It is a fascinating transformation, so I can see why they went down that road. And this trilogy, for a lot of people, this one is the one that people often say is really good. But the problem with the other films in the trilogy is they do kind of just feel like, oh, they're just filler. And it just kind of feels like, I can see that, but I do feel like with how they deal with trauma in the first film, with it being sort of like a generational thing, going from Laurie to Karen to Alison, is a very interesting idea that's very well explored in that film. And like the fact that, she's sort of Laurie's projecting her own anxieties onto her daughter, thus teaching her how to, self-defense and all the rest of it. And then Karen growing up and having to have her own daughter and having to project something different onto her, but it's still the same thing that Laurie's doing, but on the opposite end of the spectrum. That is an interesting idea. And in the second film, it's basically talking about how evil infects an entire community and how that trauma can often, present itself as then sort of creating flash mobs where they're hunting down people and hurting innocent people along the way. And then in the third film, when all the dust has settled, all the chaos of Halloween Kills has happened, you see how this entire evil has pretty much manifested itself in another individual, but it's not necessarily something that just happens out of nowhere like with Michael. It's literally something that's projected onto another person in almost a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of way. Like, everyone told Corey Cunningham that he was bad, and when he couldn't take it anymore, he became what they wanted him to be. He became the next boogeyman, and that's an interesting idea. And I would have been happy, I know this is a very controversial decision, but I would have been happy if Michael Myers' road just ended here and Corey became the new Michael. And that would have been just a very interesting way of doing it, because it would carry on an interesting tradition. But that's just me, that's just my opinion, and I just think it would have been interesting. But that's my views on Halloween 2018. Liked the first one, didn't like the other two, but as time's gone on and as I've rewatched them, I found there's something to appreciate in all of them, and that's mine. I still love the original trilogy, though, by the way. I still love Halloween 1, Halloween 2, and Halloween H2O. But I do think that there's something in this new trilogy that's worth looking back on, besides the Michael Myers character. What he is able to inspire in other people is far more fascinating as well. So I think that's something that people should look into and look at again and see if your opinion's changed, perhaps. But that's my number 10, and my number 9 is Lars von Trier. The films of Lars von Trier. And Lars von Trier is a filmmaker from Sweden, and he mostly directs films that are very controversial. And in many ways, he directs all sorts of different films, but for the most part, he does often focus on folklorish tales told in a very domesticated way. Like, say, for example, one of his films, Antichrist, it's essentially the story of creation of Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden, but told from the point of view of a heavily bereaved couple who are trying to mend their relationship after losing their child. And in the case of films like Antichrist, in the case of films like Melancholia, it's a film about a family, a dysfunctional family, at a wedding trying to mend their fractured relationships, but it's told as the world is literally about to come to an end. And a lot of people might say that sounds like a very good, filmmaker who sounds very interesting. But to me anyway, I think his films are a bit pretentious, and I think his films aren't really as clever as they like to think they are. And to a lot of people, you'll have different things to come away with a lot of his films. But I think personally, he's very pretentious. His films are very deliberately shocking just for the sake of being shocking, I feel. There's all sorts of very graphic imagery in his films. They're not very pleasant to watch a lot of the time. And they can just be very hard, mean-spirited and cruel just for the sake of it. Whereas in the case of certain films, he has made good films, though. I think his film Breaking the Waves is a really good film. It's a very harrowing performance by Emily Watson, who plays this woman who, after just losing her husband, she sort of goes down a downward spiral of grief, and she goes through a lot of interesting things. And the way it all comes together is just genuinely heartbreaking. It literally... Lars von Trier does something very wonderful. It's tragic, but it also is something that he does that's really wonderful, which is he is able to make you feel sorry for this woman, and you're able to care about this character and who she is, so that when she goes down the road that she goes down, we're absolutely devastated when it happens, because we do genuinely care about this character, and we do care. Whether it's through the writing of Lars von Trier or whether it's through Emily Watson's performance is entirely up to you. It depends on how you read it. But what I think is very important is he makes us care about this character, so that when bad stuff happens to her, we genuinely are shocked, and we do want to see her get out of it. And I won't spoil what happens to her at the end of the film, but I do feel like it's worth watching just for that. But I do want to apologise if people do feel the urge to burst into tears after watching it, because I certainly did when I first watched it. But if you do find yourself bursting into tears, I do apologise after watching Breaking the Waves, but I would highly recommend it. But yeah, I'm just not a fan of his films overall, but I do think there is a bit of a genius in Lars von Trier, but I just don't think it's showing itself in his recent filmography. So that's my number 9, and my number 8. It will be my last one for this lineup, because we're getting up to 8 minutes. I'm just going to talk about Peaky Blinders, and Peaky Blinders is a show that I just loved once upon a time. I literally have, and I was actually going to film in those pyjamas, but because they needed a wash, I had to, take them off and wash them. But for me, I even have Peaky Blinders pajamas. That's how much of a fan of this show I am. So it basically takes place in the 1910s in Birmingham, and it follows a crime family known as the Peaky Blinders, who are being helmed by Thomas Shelby, played by Cillian Murphy. And this show's pretty good. It was written by Stephen Knight, who made films like Locke and Eastern Promises with David Cronenberg. And he is a good writer. He's a good screenwriter. I love Rock, and I love Locke and Eastern Promises. I think they're two of my favourite films by Stephen Knight. But Peaky Blinders, it really started to go off the rails for me. In fact, I literally decided right then and there I don't want to watch this show anymore after one scene where I don't know which season it was on, but it was where Adrian Brody was the villain. He played this sort of mafioso, Italian mafioso type. And he wanted to make a statement with the Peaky Blinders where he stages this big boxing match where it's quite rowdy anyway, and he decides to take out one of the crime members of the Peaky Blinders. And he's quite a beloved character, but when he gets attacked, they do this thing where he goes into the locker room, and this guy comes up behind him and tries to strangle him with a wire. And I'd have actually liked it if they just cut the film there and then just basically said, gone to the next day and said, oh, this person's dead. Thomas Shelby, this guy's died. Your right-hand man's died. And then had the fallout happen there, and then people would be shocked. And then when it's revealed, spoiler alert, that he is actually alive at the end of the season, you'd be shocked too, and you'd be actually quite surprised, and you'd be like, yay, good for him, he's alive. But the fact that they cut to a close-up of his face, him sort of, straining with the pressure of the hold of the wire on him, and they're literally showing the wire in the frame as he's sort of like, they're showing this close-up, it telegraphed the twist way too soon. And I think Stephen Knight could have very easily said, okay, lose that close-up, let's just leave it with him coming into the locker room and him, potentially being strangled by this wire. That would have been much more better, because it would have had much more of an impact. But because they lingered on that shot and they had that close-up, it ruined the surprise for me, because it's so obviously a telegraph that he was going to live. And that's where I just kind of went from a huge fan to going, no, sir. And I absolutely just really am disappointed that I've put this on the list, but I really do think it's a good show. It's just that you have to be aware of the fact that it is going to get rough after that. But yeah, or even when that happened, it was going to get rough. But part of me just feels like that was a rough start, or that was a rough middle period. And that's my list so far. I'm looking at the time right now, and we're already 12 minutes in. So I'm going to cut it off at number 8, and I hope you enjoy this list so far. Let me know what your TV shows and films that you've changed your mind on over the years have been in the comments. Let me know, please, because I'd really like to engage in a conversation with you guys about this, because I do think it's a very interesting thing to happen when that does happen with TV shows and films, when that does happen, what it kind of does with people in many different respects. I will be filming part 2 shortly after this, but it might take a while for that one to come out, but I will most certainly, get right onto this list afterwards. So I hope you enjoyed this list so far. Let me know what your list of films that you've changed your mind on over the years is. I hope you're all having a very good day. This has been Josh with WHIMS. Take care. Bye for now.